Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into regular expressions, what the cool kids call regex. Back in 2013, I did a pretty extensive blog post about regex, but today I want to cover it with a video and jump into specific exercises after we get through all the basics. So it's going to be kind of wax on, wax off. We're going to be using this regex tool here to test our regex and build it out. So the first thing we're going to start out with is the Swiss Army knife of all regex, and that's the pipe character. So I'm going to go into here, and this is actually based on an exercise I had to do for a client once. I had to scrape a list of countries from the internet. I am going to do a series on scraping after I finish this series on regex. And actually, let me back up a little bit. So my intention with this video is to create an intro and get you really comfortable with regex. Then I'm going to do at least a few more videos showing you how to actually use regex out in the wild, using examples from Google Analytics, Google Docs. You can actually use regex in Google Docs, Google Sheets, Tableau, and maybe some SQL. So you get to use regex all over the place. And if you learn it, and I'm going to break it down in really simple terms, if you learn it, it's going to really free you up as a marketer or anyone who regularly has to not only analyze data, but sometimes go out and get the data yourself. So when I do this series on scraping, regex will come back up. So this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving. So let's say you have a list of the countries in the EU and you want to extract them from a list of all countries. What you can do is just separate each of them with this pipe character. And this pipe character on a Mac keyboard is along the right edge, just above your return key, and you have to press shift to get to it. So it's a little bit out of the way. The more you do regex, the more comfortable you'll get with the pipe character. I think it's pretty much the same with a PC, except obviously return is the enter key, but it's along that right side of your keyboard. So all this means is or. You will use this in Google Analytics. So I use this when I create custom channels, and I have an entire guide on custom channels. I use this when pulling together campaign tags. So I use it a lot. I use it in SQL. I'm starting to use it more in Python. I mean, it's just, you use it everywhere. And so what we're going to do here, this is just a tool that allows you to test your regex. So I just drop the regex in. These are all of the list of EU countries. One thing I had to do with this particular tool is under flags, I had to enable multi-line. So if you're going to use this tool and you're going to drop multiple lines, you'll want to enable that. And you'll see all of the EU countries highlighted. Now, this in and of itself isn't particularly interesting in this context. If you're building out a filter in Google Analytics, like I said, we'll get to, it's very, very powerful. You can also use this to build out views in Google Analytics. You can use it everywhere. Okay, so next up, another power tool we have, and this one I'm going to introduce both of them. So first off, we have the dot character. The dot here, and you can see everything gets highlighted, and the reason for that is dot just means any one character. You will most commonly see the dot with a star after it. This is called a wildcard, and it is the wildest of wildcards. It literally means like grab everything and anything. There are no restrictions. You need to be careful with using dot star because it is very processor intensive. So you don't want to use it if you can get more specific. The name of the game with regex is writing increasingly elegant regex, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So dot means any one character. Star actually means 0 or more. So that means that this one character, it may or may not exist. And the kind of complement to this, if you want to kind of ratchet it down a little bit more, is the plus. So the plus character actually says it's one or more. So that just says there has to be one character. You can't just have nothing, but there may also be more. So we'll get into more specific examples. And then this, well, here, we'll jump into an example and then I'll explain how you can use the square brackets. So I'm going to go in here, delete all of this. I have a list of kindergarten words. And let's say here you want to match, C, and then you can have any one character and then T. You'll see here it matched cat, cot, and cut. It didn't match cap. It didn't match anything else. So this will match anything that starts with a C, has another letter, and starts with a T. Now you have to be careful. We'll get into the caret character. So this isn't exactly a real world example. But let's say you want to tighten it down a little bit more. You have the option of square brackets. So if I went in here and I said, I only want cat or cot, then the way the square brackets work is you just put in any character that the computer can choose from. So you just have a list of characters. And this is a little awkward at first because we're so used to separating characters with something. We're used to comma separated characters. We're not used to having individual characters just mashed together like this. So that is something that you'll have to get used to. But that is how that works. We will actually use these square brackets quite a bit in this video. Okay. Next up, we have the asterisk character, or usually called the star character. If I wanted to also loop in Calcutta, then I would need to put a dot star and then another dot star. And now you'll see that that is selected as well. In Google Analytics and some of these tools, you actually don't need the dot star. Regex is kind of like a contains filter on roids. Sometimes with some tools, you do need to explicitly assign that dot star. So we did it in this case. Sometimes you'll also see the dot star surrounded with parentheses. That's also totally fine. We will get into parentheses. All right, next up, we are going to talk about the backslash. Let's grab these, drop them in here, get rid of that. So Regex has a bunch of reserved characters. These characters include brackets, parentheses, curly braces, any of your mathematical operators, anchors, which we'll get to, and backslash and a dot. So basically, as you get more comfortable with Regex, you'll be more familiar with all of the characters that are used in Regex. And if you want to use the character as itself, so not as a Regex character, but as itself, like let's say you want to identify a question mark like in a URL, then you need to have this special notation called a backslash. And the backslash is actually right under the pipe character. It just looks like that. So what you need to do is identify that particular character with a backslash. In this case, the $sign is a Regex character. We will get to that in a moment. But if we want to identify it as an American $sign, then we need to use a backslash and then drop in a $sign. And then we would go on from there. We will be able to identify these characters in just a minute. But you can see here that by putting that backslash in, it identifies only the $signs. And now we have numbers. So the regex for number is backslash D. D for digit. Now this is case sensitive. So if I put a capital D, it won't identify any of the numbers. Why is that? Well, a capital letter So we have several regex characters that are just a single character with the backslash, and we'll get to the other ones in a minute. But the capital version of those is just the reverse. So a capital D means anything but a digit. And that doesn't select anything because we only have digits after the dollar sign. If I dropped an A in here, now that would get selected. So we're not going to do that because that's silly. So we're going to go back to a D. Now we want to be able to tell the browser there can be any number of these characters. So we don't want to get super specific because in this list there could ultimately be more whole numbers that are dollar amounts. So we are just going to drop in that plus sign. And voila, we have it. We're not going to worry about these quite yet. We'll get to these. Okay, now let's say I want to also be able to select this number here. How would I do that? Well, I would do that with a question mark. So a question mark technically means 0 or more of the characters that are in front of it. So if I put a question mark after this, I'm basically saying there might be a digit. There doesn't have to be. So I like to think of the question mark character as whatever is right in front of it is optional. And you'll see that somewhat frequently, especially when you're trying to grab misspellings. And we're going to walk through an exercise that I actually had to do for a client years ago, where I had to write out regex to capture all of the different ways that people misspelled Britney Spears. And this data was coming from Google Trends. And it turned out to be like a monster regex because people can't spell. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, put that plus sign back. And now we're saying that there might be a dot and then there might be 2 characters, but those are optional. So the way that we would do that is, first of all, we're going to have to wrap it in these parentheses. Now, these parentheses are just like what you used parentheses for in algebra. It's just a way of grouping, nothing too crazy. But let's say I need the decimal. So the decimal, because it's a regex character, it has to be escaped. So we're going to put that in there, and now you see that it's selected the decimal. And then we're going to say there could be 2 more digits. So I could put backslash D and then another backslash D. I'll show you a more elegant way of noting that in just a few moments. But now we need to make this optional, this whole section here, the dot and then the 2 additional numbers. So we're just going to put a question mark after it. And that just means everything inside your parentheses is optional. So now we've selected 1284 and we've selected this number. But now how do we get the cells in separator? And what if there were millions or billions? We want to be able to capture all of the dollar amounts. So we're going to go back to the brackets. So we're going to wrap this digit character in brackets, but we're going to say that there could be a digit or a comma. So now what we're saying is that there could be any combination of digits and commas, which are thousands or millions separator, and any number. And then we're possibly going to have cents. So we're going to have a dot and then 2 digits. But I mentioned earlier that we could make this more elegant. And we do that with something called curly braces. So what we're going to say here is that there can't be more than 2 digits. So now we're going to use these curly braces and we're going to drop in a 2. So these curly braces can only have numbers inside of them. And what this is saying is that there will be a digit and another one. So there will be a total of 2 digits. If you had, let's just say, there could be 2 or 3 digits, then you could separate it with, let's say, not for this example, but Let's say that it made sense that there could be 2 or 3 digits. You could separate it with a comma. Or if you potentially had 4 digits, then you would separate it with a comma and put a 4. So what you're putting is the minimum number of digits and the maximum separated by a comma. You cannot use a hyphen in here. That will not work. That will break. You can use hyphens elsewhere. So it gets a little confusing, but that's where some of these tools can be really helpful. If you're working in Google Analytics, the best way to test your regex is to just open the report that you're trying to filter and play around in there. And we'll do that in a little bit. Okay, let's see what else we have. I think that's all we can do with that one. So now we are going to introduce the caret and the \W. Okay, let's say you have a bunch of text on a page or in a spreadsheet, and you want to be able to extract all of the social media profiles. So we know that they're going to start with an @ symbol, and then they're going to have a combination of letters, potentially hyphen, underscore, and not too much else. So that brings us to the caret character. The caret is above the 6 on your keyboard. And what this does is it dictates that the regex you're going to write, it has to start. Like whatever you're looking at, it has to start with whatever you type in next. So if I put in a capital T, then it will only select this because this is the only line that starts with a capital T. So we're going to say it has to start with an @ symbol. So already you can see this @ symbol is not going to be selected because it doesn't start. It's an email. It's not a social media profile. Next up, we're going to say, all right, then it has to be followed by, I guess it could start with an underscore, and that's fine. Then it has to have a word character. The \W in regex is equivalent to writing out A to Z lowercase, A to Z uppercase, 0 to 9, or underscore. Oddly enough, it doesn't include the hyphen. So if you also need to include a hyphen, then you need to add that in. So far, so good. So even if my social media profile had an underscore, that wouldn't be a problem. But it's only selecting the first character. So we know what we need to do. We need to add in a plus. But now we have this hyphen. So how are we going to account for that? Very easy. We use the square brackets. And we just say it can be any word character or a hyphen. And there you go. If you have any other character that could possibly be included, I've never seen a question mark in a social profile identifier, but let's just suspend reality for a moment and say that there is one. We'll just put it here. It's not selecting it. So we would drop it in here. Now, why didn't I escape this? Well, if you were putting a character that's a regex character inside square brackets, you don't need to escape it. You can, it still works. I see this done a lot. Like when I go into clients and Google Analytics accounts, I'll see this \. It's just because people get used to escaping regex characters, but you don't need it. And that's only if it's inside the square brackets. Okay, next up, we are going to dive in a little bit more to parentheses. All right, so Google Analytics has this issue. They get a little passive aggressive, and there are sources that are clearly search engines, but Google doesn't report them in search engines. And hopefully I'll remember to include this exercise in the Google Analytics video that I do, because I think it's a really important one. But what we're going to do here is identify all of the organic search sources with the explicit purpose of being able to extract them from the referral channel and move them over to organic search. We're not going to do that in this video because we're really focusing on just the regex, but that's the intention. So the search sources are search.yahoo.com, search.ask.com, search.aol.com, and search.xfinity.com. Oh, we'll also throw in Ecosia, because I don't think that Google yet recognizes Ecosia as a search engine. It's actually a really cool search engine. They donate a portion of their revenue to Plant Trees, so it's really cool. The search results aren't quite as spectacular as Google's, but I try to support them whenever I can. And it wasn't that long ago before Google recognized DuckDuckGo as a search engine. I think just in like the last couple years. So what we want to do here is identify the organic search sources. So we are going to start with search. So this could be search, and then there's going to be a dot. But that doesn't account for Ecosia. So we're going to wrap this in a question mark. And now we're going to say Yahoo or Ask or AOL or Xfinity or Ecosia, and then .com. And there we go. We have selected only the organic search sources, leaving the regular sources. Okay. I'm going to drop those in here. So let's say that I want to be able to just select in Google Analytics. Let's say I pull up my pages report or my landing pages report. And let's say I only want to select landing pages that are the top level directory. So blog, about, services, and I also threw in an about me. I just have about, so all of my top level directories are just one word, so that would be pretty simple for me, but some people might have hyphens. So what we're going to introduce here is we already have the caret, but we need to be able to tell the browser it has to stop with the second /. So how do we do that? So we're going to say it has to start with a /. Now this particular tool requires that you escape /. It doesn't actually require, it will work without it. Oop. There we go. It will work without it, but it just flags it. But in most tools, you don't need to escape a /. So I'm not going to do it. But now we have any word character, and we could just say plus, but then that won't pull in the about me. So we'll pretend I don't have about, I only have an about me. So we've done this before. We're going to say it can be a word character or a hyphen. So we're going to include any word character or a hyphen and any number of them. So this directory could be 16 characters long and it will be fine. But now we say, okay, then we want a /, but we don't want anything after the /. So we're going to use this $, which lets the browser know it has to end with whatever character came before it. So in this case, it was a /, and now we only have the top level directories. Now, similar to the digit character, if I capitalize the W, it would negate that character. So it would mean anything but a word character, which we don't want to do. Okay, now let's talk about negating pattern matching. So in Regex, you have the ability to tell the browser what you don't want to match. So I pulled up a list of keywords. I wrote the books, Making Data Sexy, one for Excel for Mac and one for the PC. And I just pulled together some keywords that let's just pretend I'm ranking for. I really am not tracking the performance of that site. But let's say we have mostly text, but then we have some ISBNs. And I don't really want to include ISBN keywords in my visualization for whatever reason. I wouldn't actually recommend this. But what we would do here is we'd put the square brackets in, and then we're going to use the caret. So you have to be really careful. It could be easy to get the caret confused because it has really no association with how the caret is used when you are saying an expression needs to start with this. What you're doing here is anything you put inside the brackets. So if you're not negating it, if I put in A, E, I, O, U, it would select all of the vowels. The opposite of that is anything I put in here after a caret will not be selected. So if I just put in \D, I don't even have to let the browser know how many characters. I just tell it I don't want any digits. You'll see, let me deselect that. We only have text selected. So perfect. We're going to get a little more experience with digits and curly braces. Let's say we only want to identify phone numbers where hyphens are used. So it won't grab this one, it will just grab this one and this one. So the best way to approach this is to identify the patterns. So the pattern for a US phone number is 3 digits, then a hyphen, then another 3 digits, then a hyphen, and then 4 digits. So how do we do that? We are already absolutely pro at this. So of course we would use a \D, and then we're going to say 3 of those. Then we're going to have a hyphen, and then we're going to have another \D and another 3. What is the problem here? Why is it grabbing this? We don't want to grab this number. It's because we need that caret. We need to tell the browser, nope, it has to start with 3 digits, then a hyphen, then another 3 digits. Okay, now we're back on track. Going to drop in a hyphen and then digit and 4 digits. Perfect. Now let's say we also want to be able to include this phone number format. There are a few different ways that we could do it. We're going to take a simplified approach just because I don't want to throw you into the deep end of the pool. So just to be safe, we're going to wrap this in parentheses, then we're dropping a pipe character, which just means or, and now we're going to account for this style here. Oh, we don't want this number here, so we're going to drop a $. Okay, that just grabs the 2 phone numbers. All right. So now we're going to say, or it will start with a left parenthesis. So we need to escape that because that's a regex character. And then again, I'm just going to grab this here so we can just paste it in. Then it's going to have 3 digits and then a right parenthesis. So we need to escape that. I'm going to wrap this. And this should work by the time we're finished. Okay, so we're going to have a left parenthesis, then 3 numbers, then a right parenthesis, and then we're going to have a space. So in regex, I can drop in a space, or I can use the space character, which includes all spaces. So it would also include a tab, and I think there's one other. I've only seen it used for actual spaces or tab. If you wanted to identify where there are, let's say, 3 spaces, then of course we would put in the 3 inside curly braces. But we only have 1. So then we're going to have another 3 digits. So we're going to identify that the way we have been. Then a hyphen, and then 4 digits, and the end. So now you can see that both number formats are included. Okay, let's do a few more exercises, just kind of involving everything that we've learned. These are somewhat common. I mean, you just don't know how you're going to need to use regex, but I want you to be prepared. Again, you'll get more ideas when I actually go through the other videos and how I use regex inside other apps. But all right, let's say here, I just want to identify email addresses. So what's the pattern we have going here? So we're definitely going to start with a word character, and then we're going to have multiple word characters. We might have an underscore, or we could have a hyphen. Then we're going to have an @ symbol. Then we're going to have more word characters and possibly a hyphen. Then we're going to have another dot, and then unlimited number of word characters. Now, I've seen regex for email get much, much more specific than this. In fact, this particular tool actually has in here a community patterns. And so you can actually go in here and look for like email. You can use a filter. Let's see here. So there are all kinds of regex for email validation. We're going to take a simple approach. Crawl, walk, run, and all that. So let's start with a caret and then the word character. And we're going to drop a plus sign. But remember that doesn't account for the hyphen. So we're going to go back in here. Going to wrap it in square brackets. And we're going to say you can also include a hyphen. Next up, we have the @ symbol. So we're just going to drop an @ symbol. And now we're going to have more word characters. We don't have to account for all variations. Again, I've done this myself. In fact, I think I even need to update my blog post from 2013 because I didn't always take the most elegant approach. So you will frequently see A to Z, capital A to capital Z, and then all the different characters that could potentially be in there. It works, but the word character is more elegant. All right, and next up, we're going to have a dot. Again, whoops. We're going to have a dot that needs to be escaped. And now we're going to have more word characters. And then a $sign. Let's double check here. Yep, we selected everything we wanted. And let me see. Yeah, you can see here. Let's just pull this in just to see if it works. It should. I mean, anyone can create these. See, this isn't a best practice because it doesn't have that caret. So if you have something in there that has an email address, but it doesn't start with email, so this is a URL that's capturing the email address, which you shouldn't do if you're using Google Analytics. So we would need to drop a caret in. But like I said, I've seen some that they just get really specific. Okay. All right. Now I mentioned this. So I was working with data from Google Trends and for some reason needed to capture all the different spellings of Britney Spears. So I had exported a whole bunch of data for a client, but there were so many misspellings. This doesn't even come close to encapsulating all of the misspelled words, but this is how her name is actually spelled. So we have our work cut out for us. Okay, so it's going to start with a B. We could put the caret in. If everything really does just start with a B, we don't have to have the character. So I'm actually not going to include it. And in this case, because we have different cases, it could be a lowercase b or a capital B. Boom, we're already on our way. Next letter. Everyone agreed there should be an R, but it starts veering from there. So most of the misspellings had an I, but one was missing the I. So we're going to put an I in, and we're going to put that question mark, which indicates that it's optional. Okay, so next, everyone seems to agree there's a T. Now, I could go bit by bit through all of these, but at this point, this is where the inmates have taken over the asylum. So what I did was I said, then a dot star, but I didn't want it to just include everything because there was more than just Britney Spears. There were all kinds of other keywords, and I just needed to identify keywords that included Britney Spears. Okay, so we don't want to just do that. So we're going to say, then everyone seems to be agreed that there's going to be an N. So now by dropping in the N, we're kind of back on track. From the N, oh, that's interesting. Well, it also included the Britney with two N's because the first N was included in the dot star. So fine. So now we have the possibility of EY, Y, or I. Okay, so we'll count for the E by saying E and then drop a question mark. And now we'll say, we haven't used this very much, so this is the other option when you have just like a finite number of characters to choose from. I could use the square brackets. Again, I'm just trying to familiarize you with all the different types of regex combinations you might see out there. So next, everyone agrees that there is a space. So we're going to include that. And then there is either a capital or lowercase s. Doesn't matter about the order. And then everyone agreed that there's a P, and they all agree that there's an E. From there, it could be an A or an E or neither. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll say A, E, and then drop in a question mark. So that makes it optional. And then an R and an S. Nope. And an R. One has an E. So we'll make an E optional and then S. Now we've captured all the different variations of Britney Spears that I included here. Okay. Let's say we want to identify all of the URLs with query parameters. So query parameters are a wrecking ball to your content reports. I find that clients tend to be hoarders when it comes to query parameters. And when you suggest removing query parameters from the URLs, they will typically get nervous. Like, oh, well, what if I decide to use them later on? Like I might want to parse them out of the URL. And it's just not going to happen. And there are better ways to capture something than parsing it out of the URL, because then you have to do all kinds of calculations to be able to bring the weighted data back in, whether it's in a database or Google Sheets or whatever you're using, Excel. It's just not elegant and you don't need them. So the only time you want to have query parameters in your URL is if the query parameter determines unique content. So obviously, if you don't have WordPress set up properly, and let's say your pages are all numbered, so instead of your page being /about/ its page equals 12, well, then you can't exclude the query parameter page from Google Analytics because every page would show up as your home page. So I haven't seen an example of that in years. I don't even know how many years. So for most clients, there are things that like filter the page or manipulate the page in some way, maybe the sort by price, high to low or low to high, or filters maybe in some kind of faceted way. Like let's say you're at a glasses site and you want to filter by material equals plastic or material equals wire or gender equals female, things like that. They're just filtering the page and you want to grab the canonical version of the page. So one thing that you may want to do is identify any URL with a query parameter and then just lob those query parameters off. And I will show how to do that in the Google Analytics one. Now, one nice thing about Google Analytics is this filter here that you see in every report. I think every report that has a timeline, you'll see this filter. So if it has a table, you'll see a filter. But Google made it so that it's naturally sensitive to regex. So you can go in here and go to advanced and choose matching regex, but you don't have to. I think you used to have to do that, but then they just made it so that it's sensitive to regex. So all we'd have to do is just drop in a question mark because query parameters always start with a question mark. There's not much we can do with it here, but using a filter, we can remove question marks from our URLs. Okay, so next up, let's say we want to identify site search terms that are 3 words for whatever reason. So the way that we would do that is we would need to rock the word character and the space characters. So we're going to say \W+, so there can be any number of word characters. In this case, depending on your use case, you might want to not include underscores, but for most of us, it's not going to come up. So I'm not going to do it. So we're going to say any number of word characters, and then there's going to be a space and only one space, and then any number of word characters and a plus sign. So now we have 2 words, and we're going to want to start this with a caret, and I'll show you why. Okay, then we're going to need another space character, and finally more word characters, and then a $sign. So we have a word, then a space, then a word, a second word, then a second space, a third word, and the $sign. And sure enough, we only have 3 word search terms. So let's say I wanted 3 or more. Then I could just drop that $sign. Now it's requiring that there is at least 3 words. And that's going to include 3. Okay, this is a common one in Google Analytics. Let's say we're going to go back to our tool here. All right, let's say you want to identify your staging servers and you want to exclude them from your Google Analytics view. Again, I'll show you how to do that in probably my next video. So our staging subdomains are staging, production, and I think that's it. Yeah, so staging and production. Okay, so this is really simple, especially after everything else we've done. We're just going to say staging or production, then a dot, mydomain.com. Super, super easy after everything we've done, but it is something that people frequently will need to do. Okay, as our final exercise, we are going to identify zip codes from this list of addresses. So we're going to jump in here, and first of all, we'll start with these. These are simple. there will be 5 numbers in a row. So we're going to say that there's a digit. We don't want to use the caret in this case because what we're going to be grabbing is going to actually be at the end. So we're going to say there's a digit and there are actually 5 of them, and that grabs these 3. Perfect. But sometimes in the US, a zip code can have an additional hyphen and then 4 more numbers. So let's account for that. We're going to say hyphen, digit, 4 characters, but all of this is optional. So we're going to wrap these in parentheses and drop in a question mark. And there we have it. We've identified all of our zip codes. This is something that you might need to do in a spreadsheet. Like the address might be in one cell and you might need to extract like the street number, then the street, then the city, the state, and the zip code, or however your address is configured where you live. So this is a high level kind of introduction to Regex. Hopefully this will help you to be less intimidated by Regex. As I said, this is going to be a part of a series, and we're going to jump into really specific marketing tools and examples in those tools where you might want to use Regex. One of the most powerful options that a lot of marketers don't know about is the ability to extract, and sometimes to extract and replace. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them here on the video or in my blog post. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. And I look forward to continuing in this journey.